Welcome to this fascinating episode where we explore 4 truly terrifying stories. In this video, we take a closer look at 4 killers who thought they were real vampires and the terrible things they did. Let's get started. On a quiet summer evening in Massachusetts, 23-year-old James Reaver brutally murdered his grandmother, Carmen Lopez. Reaver, a troubled man with a history of mental illness, claimed to be a 700-year-old vampire and believed that his grandmother was also a vampire who had been feeding on him while he slept. In a twisted act of violence, Reaver shot his grandmother 4 times with gold-painted bullets, stabbed her several times in the heart, drank her blood, and then set fire to her house in an attempt to hide the evidence. Reaver's descent into madness had been a slow one, starting with disturbing drawings and escalating to the killing and drinking of animals' blood. James Reaver's fascination on the idea that his grandmother was a vampire reached a dangerous peak when he became convinced that a vampire he met in Florida, whom he believed to be 200 years old, instructed him to use golden bullets to commit murder. When confronted about the crime, Reaver gave 2 separate explanations for his actions. He told his mother that he needed to drink his grandmother's blood to survive as a vampire, and also told psychiatrists that he believed his grandmother was a vampire who came to feed on him while he slept. In his twisted mind, Reaver believed that by killing those he considered bad, he could come back as a handsome man with a car and girls, and his life would be perfect. During the trial, Reaver's attorney warned the jury that the evidence that they were about to hear was so bizarre it staggers, it shocks the imagination. The jury heard how Reaver had been a loner as a teen, roaming the countryside at night and feeling the need to drink animal and human blood. At home, he even consumed ketchup and oil mixtures because they resembled blood. After a lengthy trial, the jury deliberated for 3 hours and found Reaver guilty of second-degree murder, arson, and assault on one of the arresting officers. He was sentenced to life in prison at Walpole State Prison. The shock and gruesome murder of Carmen Lopez was a tragic reminder of the destructive power of mental illness and the devastating consequences it can have on innocent lives. Born in Sacramento, California, Richard Trenton Chase was a notorious serial killer who terrorized Northern California in the late 1970s. With a disturbing history of psychopathy and drug use, Chase's name still sends shivers down the spines of those who remember his horrific crimes. Chase exhibited signs of psychopathy from an early age, including all 3 traits of the McDonald triad theory, a concept that suggests the development of violent psychopathy. And as he grew older, he developed hypochondriasis and began exhibiting bizarre behaviours. Chase claimed that his heart stopped beating and that his pulmonary artery was stolen. He would walk around naked in front of guests, even in the house where he rented with his roommates. Sick of this conduct, they chose to leave. Alone in the apartment, Chase's behaviour became even more erratic. He began to capture, kill, and disembowel animals, which he ate raw. He also mixed raw animal organs with Coca-Cola and drank the mixture, believing it would keep his heart from shrinking. Between 1973 and 1976, Chase was hospitalised in a mental institution after injecting rabbit blood into his veins. The institution's staff nicknamed him Dracula because of his obsession with blood, and he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Chase was given psychotropic drugs for treatment and was eventually deemed no longer a threat to society and released into his mother's care in 1976. In 1977, Chase was arrested in Pyramid Lake, Nevada, with cow's blood on his body and a bucket of blood in his truck. It was determined that the blood came from cows and no charges were filed. However, just 2 weeks later, Chase committed his first known murder, shooting Ambrose Griffin. On January 23, 1978, Chase broke into a house and shot Teresa Wallen 3 times. On January 27, he broke into another house and killed Evelyn Miroth, her son Jason, her grandson David Ferreira, and her boyfriend Danny Meredith before committing necrophilia and cannibalism with Miroth's body. He fled when a visitor arrived, but he was caught shortly afterwards. Chase was convicted of 6 counts of murder in 1979. The defence tried to get him convicted of second-degree murder instead of first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty. The defence argued that Chase's murders were not premeditated because of his history of mental illness. On May 8, 1979, a jury found him guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. On December 26, 1980, Chase was discovered dead in his cell from an overdose of prescription drugs. Fritz Hamann, also known as the Vampire of Hanover, was a German serial killer and cannibal who murdered at least 24 young men and boys between 1918 and 1924 in Hanover, Germany. At the age of 16, Hamann committed his first documented sexual offences, all of which involved luring young boys to secret locations, typically cellars, where he would then sexually assault them. He was arrested and sent to a mental asylum. 7 months later, in January 1898, Hamann escaped the mental institution and he fled to Zurich. Over the next decade, Hamann lived mainly as a burglar, having been arrested several times for theft and fraud, and was even sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, he managed to gain the trust of law enforcement and started working as an informant for the Hanover police after release. It was during this time that Hamann began his killing spree. He would lure young men and boys, many of them homeless, to his apartment with the promise of food and shelter. Once there, he would kill them by biting through their throats and then disposing of their bodies. Many of the victims were never found, but Hamann was known to have sold some of their meat to local butcher shops. Hamann's crimes were finally uncovered in 1924, when a young boy went missing and a search of Hamann's apartment revealed blood and human remains. He was arrested and confessed to 24 murders, although it is believed that he may have killed even more. The actual number of Hamann's victims will never be known. After his arrest, Hamann made several ambiguous statements about the number of victims he killed. Initially, Hamann claimed that he killed maybe 30, maybe 40 victims. And later, he would claim that the actual number of victims he killed was between 50 and 70. Hamann's trial was a sensation in Germany, with many calling for the death penalty. He was found guilty and sentenced to death by beheading. He was executed on April 15, 1925. Fritz Hamann's story, like many serial killers, has fascinated people for decades. Some speculate that his history of mental illness and abuse may have contributed to his actions, while others believe he was simply a monster, with no excuse for his crimes. Roderick Justin Ferrell, known as Rod, was a notorious American criminal and cult leader in the late 1990s. Born in 1980, Ferrell was a member of a group of teenagers in Murray, Kentucky, who called themselves the Vampire Clan. Obsessed with the role-playing game Vampire: The Masquerade, Ferrell created Visago, a 500-year-old vampire he used as his alter ego. This nickname is believed to be a twisted version of the demon Visago, a powerful entity from the mystical literary work The Lesser Key of Solomon. On November 25, 1996, a shocking discovery was made in the Wendorf family home in Eustis, Florida. Jennifer Wendorf, daughter of Naomi Ruth Queen and Richard Wendorf, found her parents brutally beaten to death. Ferrell and his accomplice, Howard Scott Anderson, entered the home through the unlocked garage and used a crowbar as a murder weapon. Ferrell viciously attacked Richard as he slept on the couch, fracturing his skull and ribs and ultimately killing him. When Ruth entered the room, Ferrell beat her to death with the same weapon. Ferrell claimed Ruth's attack with a hot cup of coffee caused him to change his original plan to leave her alive. The tragic scene also had a disturbing symbol, as Richard was found with burn marks in the shape of a V, Ferrell's symbol for marking members of his alleged vampire cult. In 1998, Ferrell pleaded guilty to the crimes and was sentenced to death. However, his sentence was later reduced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Ferrell's lawyers tried to argue that he was insane and had been diagnosed with mental disorders such as schizotypal personality disorder and Asperger's syndrome. Despite his best efforts, Ferrell's sentence stood and he remains in prison to this day. Ferrell's accomplice, Howard Scott Anderson, was also sentenced to life in prison. In 2018, Anderson was again sentenced for 40 years in prison, with the possibility of release in 2031. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to support the channel, we have a link in the description. Don't forget to subscribe, comment, share, like, and press the bell to get notification when new videos are uploaded. You can send your real or fictional stories to the email address in the description.